Thank you. Oh, I so enjoy these guys. You know, I often find that Google is a fount of wisdom. And while I say that in tongue-in-cheek, there's much truth to it. As Google deeply reflects the values of our modern society, at least as far as a search engine can when it's largely created by well-educated, highly paid programmers who are, surprise, surprise, predominantly white males. With that caveat, here's an example. So the worship theme for this month is cultivating beauty. So just for fun, I put that phrase into Google to see what would come up. And you can probably guess. It was either sites related to gardening, especially this time of year, or to hair, skin, and nails. Fortunately, we are not constrained by the Google example, and we can ask ourselves, how often do we use the word beauty? It's in so many of our common phrases like, isn't she a beauty? Or beauty is in the eye of beholder. But what does beauty mean to you? What do you consider beautiful? In college, and my college roommates who's here today will attest to this, I was an overachiever undergraduate, and I enrolled in a graduate class called the Aesthetics of Music with Professor Wilhelm, an older German man. And how I made it through that class with zero background in philosophy, I will never know. And I shudder today to think of my feeble attempts to contribute to the class discussion around the ways in which philosophers like Immanuel Kant departed from Plato and Aristotle on the definition of beauty. What I do remember, however, is that in the Western concept of beauty, an object or an experience is considered beautiful because it evokes a feeling of pleasure and delight. So think for a moment about what you find pleasurable. Flowers, sunrises, landscapes, faces, art, music. What delights you? A waterfall, dew on a rose petal, the glowing sky at dawn at the Jersey Shore, a baby's smile, a Wyeth painting, or a Beethoven symphony, perhaps. I call this beauty outer beauty or aesthetic beauty. But is that all that's really beautiful? We've all heard the term inner beauty, but what does that really mean? I actually think the question is to ask not what is beautiful to you, but what is beautiful in you. The Irish poet and philosopher John O'Donohue wrote, "I think that beauty is not a luxury, but it ennobles the heart and reminds us of the infinity that is within us." So today I want to focus on inner beauty, which, as you will see, can manifest itself in several ways. What is that infinite beauty that O'Donohue writes about? How many of us regularly practice taking stock of what is beautiful within ourselves? For I dare say, for most of us, our self-talk centers around the shoulda or woulda or coulda rather than truly appreciating our own inner beauty. I know in my own head, I say things like, I should have been more generous to that homeless person. More often than I say things like, I've been true and steadfast when my friends are in crisis. In my own cultural upbringing, I was taught to focus on being perfect. So it's challenging for me to regularly take time to appreciate my own inner beauty without that voice of the critic within me negating all that is good. It requires spiritual practice to take stock of what is beautiful within myself and build on that strength. It takes practice not to allow that inner critic to use negatives and their associated shame to drive me towards perfection. Yes, we can accept that neither I nor anyone else will ever be perfect in this practice, but that doesn't mean we are not all beautiful within. So how do we positively create that practice of cultivating beauty? How can we regularly take stock of our own inner beauty? What actions can we take each day to strengthen those beautiful parts already within us? And what if that practice of taking stock of our inner beauty is a way to get closer to God or the universal or the spirit of life or whatever you choose to call that is greater than ourselves? What if every time we appreciate our own inner beauty, we are honoring our great Creator? This sort of practice requires us to go methodically deep within ourselves, to go all the way to that place where the ego does not live, where there is no room for the shouldas or couldas or wouldas, but only for our own inner beauty. That journey to that place of selflessness, to that place of pure love and beauty, is a spiritual journey. And many of the world's great religions and religious traditions describe and sometimes even prescribe the pathways to that place of inner beauty. Indeed, the Muslim tradition has a word for this type of beauty. It's called Jamal. Jamal. In our culture, the word Jamal generally is a masculine proper name, but in the Muslim tradition, it has a very specific meaning. Muslim scholar Rege al-Isfahani wrote, Jamal means great beauty, and there are two aspects to this. First is the beauty with which a person is characterized in soul, body, or actions. And the second is that which connects us to something else. Al-Isfahani goes on to quote the great prophet Muhammad to show that beauty connects one directly to Allah, or God. Islam is also a religion highly focused on discipline of spiritual practice. The Muslims pray 5 times a day, and among other practice, they annually fast during daylight hours each day for a month during the period of Ramadan. Tomorrow, millions of Muslims around the world will celebrate Eid al-Fitr, the day that marks the end of Ramadan. Ramadan is a time for spiritual reflection, for doing that deep inner spiritual work needed to cultivate the inner beauty. And the intentional practice of fasting, of being hungry, helps to remove the obstacles on that path to the place where the ego does not live. As Rumi reminds us in this morning's reading, if the brain and belly are burning clean with fasting, every moment a new song comes out of the fire. The fog clears, a new energy makes you run up the steps in front of you. But when your belly is full of food and drink, an ugly metal statue sits with where your spirit should. There are many cultures and traditions that practice fasting as a way to connect to the spiritual. The physiological effects on the brain from lack of nourishment can alter one's state of mind. For example, the Native Americans use fasting during their vision quest to reach a heightened state of awareness. Unitarian Universalist minister Abhi Prakash Janamanshi wrote an article in the UU World magazine in 2006 about his experience fasting during Ramadan as a non-Muslim. And in it he wrote, "I'm fasting for myself, for my own spiritual growth, to make more room for God. I want to deepen or reawaken my sense of the spirit by letting go of my cravings for good food. My hunger will be a visceral reminder of my own deepest yearnings." Many of you know my husband, Paco, who is actually drumming elsewhere this morning. He is a practicing Sufi Muslim from Senegal in West Africa. One day over lunch, just before the start of Ramadan, I asked him what his thoughts were on fasting and what the experience was like. He noted that the first week was the most difficult as the body adjusts. He said it's hard to focus, and a lot of people get hangry. He does know that word. And he even joked by saying that he hoped I never tried fasting during Ramadan because I get really hangry and we would likely end up fighting. So I asked him, I said, are there a lot of people angry and fighting during Ramadan? And his answer was quite unexpected. He said that because Ramadan is a time of self-reflection and forgiveness, most people are actually even kinder, more pleasant, more tolerant towards one another during this month. Jamal also remarked on living more compassionately because of observing Ramadan. He wrote in that article on fasting during Ramadan that, as a Unitarian Universalist, I believe that in the primacy of reason, conscience, and freedom, and I know that the biggest obstacles standing in the way of my living freely, responsibly, and compassionately is my own ego, selfishness, and unquenchable desire. Here, Jamal, though not Muslim, expresses many of the ideas I talked about earlier as part of the Muslim tradition. The ego as an obstacle, the letting go, the connection with God. This then begs the question, does fasting in the spirit of Ramadan necessarily mean the absence of food? Can one fast, for example, on social media, on the news? Can one reawaken the sense of spirit, as Jamal wrote, to let go of our egos and desires? The concept of emptying ourselves out so the spirit of life may enter is a concept that we acknowledge within our Unitarian Universalist faith tradition. But how many of us practice it in a disciplined way? Many of us practice meditation or prayer regularly. Many do yoga or Tai Chi. Others of us make art. The idea of a spiritual practice is that it must be intentional, and we must undertake our practice regularly. And we must let go of the ego, even for just a few minutes, in order to commune with that which is holy within us and recognize our own beauty. While fasting can propel our personal journey to find our inner beauty and bring us closer to the spirit of life, fasting as a community can also be a practice which cultivates beauty. Paco truly changed my thinking when he went on to say that Ramadan is Allah's way of reminding us that everyone is equal. During Ramadan, the wealthy people who do not have to worry about food insecurity must fast in the same way as those who regularly wonder whether they will eat that day or not. But tomorrow, in Eid al-Fitr, everyone will eat because each Muslim has a duty to ensure that all are able to break the fast with a celebratory feast. No one is allowed to go hungry tomorrow. And there is great beauty in that justice created by Ramadan. This idea of Ramadan as a great equalizer is not something that I had ever thought about. Our society is so focused on the individual that I immediately thought of Ramadan as a self-actualized journey within, as I was describing earlier, not as a communal undertaking. For some, having too much is a way of life. For some, having not enough is a way of life. But if we are all hungry, wouldn't that change the way we're in community with each other? We in Western societies often forget the focus on community that's embedded in other traditions. And there is a beauty of community within Ramadan, as well as the beauty of equity and justice, of everyone being hungry together and everyone breaking the fast together. There is beauty in the empathy of knowing how each other is feeling. The practice, then, of Ramadan is a way to cultivate beauty through equity, justice, and community. Extending that metaphor to our own spirituality, There is a beauty in a collective spiritual emptying out and then filling up as well. What would we see as a congregation whose bellies are full? And what might we recognize if we are all fasting together, both literally and in terms of the distractions of our everyday world? Would we not listen to each other's souls, strengthen our community, and collectively make that connection to the holy? Would we not more fully affirm our UU principles of the inherent worth and dignity of every person, of promoting justice and equity and compassion, and of growing spiritually together as a congregation? So, my friends, tomorrow, as we celebrate the holy day of Eid al-Fakir with our Muslim brothers and sisters, I will leave you with some questions that I'm going to continue to ask myself as well. What fast can you undertake? What do you need to empty out or let go of in order to cultivate moral, spiritual, and inner beauty? How can you practice Ramadan? And what fast can we take as a congregation to cultivate the practice of equity and justice and compassion, where all are treated with worth and dignity? What practices can we collectively use to find our Jamal and to make UUSMC an even more beautiful and beloved community? Amen. And may we continue to be blessed.